Now with our coverage of USAir Flight 427, the crash of that last evening. The flight and cockpit voice recorders have been recovered from the crash site, and federal investigators will use them to help determine what went wrong aboard that flight. Joining us now by phone is Leo Janssens, former test pilot and president of the Aviation Safety Institute. He's one of the FAA's designated representatives for air crash investigations. Mr. Janssens, thank you for joining us.
Yes, Kathy, let me correct that. I am not a designated representative for crash investigation. I am a designated engineering representative test pilot who can do FAA certification work. I think that's an important distinction.
All right, correction noted. Thank you very much. Let's start with the words of the Lieutenant Governor Mark Singal just a few minutes ago. He describes the aircraft itself as decimated with just fragments scattered about. This would have to have a major impact on the overall investigation.
Well, it certainly does, because they tried to piece all the aircraft components back together as the first step of the investigation. Obviously, if they're strewn all over the place in very small fragments, it's a very difficult task. But I think the first task is to, again, remove the bodies and whatnot and make sure that the families are comforted in this case.
Certainly, and so many of those families right now looking for answers, and they want answers quickly. Public starts to ask a lot of questions, theories spring up. Do you have any of your own at this point?
No, it's way too early to tell, just like the National Transportation Leaders are saying. In a case like this, you just have to wait for the experts to do their job. The only thing I would say is that I think more needs to be done in terms of aircraft prevention of accidents rather than investigation. We've been saying that a long time at the Aviation Safety Institute, but unfortunately it takes an incident like this to put it back in the public focus again.
Well, when you're saying more needs to be done, can you expand on that a little bit and how it might have had an impact on the crash last night?
Well, in terms of research into the human factors involved in aircraft crashes, in terms of the new technology that is coming out, in terms of crew rest, crew fatigue sometimes has a factor. I'm not saying any of those are in a factor in this accident. All I'm saying is I think that more research has to be done in these areas to prevent occurrences like this in the future.
When you look at when the crash happened, they were just 10 miles from the airport there in Pittsburgh. Is this often a time in which crashes occur?
Yes, it is. During the approach and landing phase, the chances of an accident are much greater than, say, in the cruise, a high-altitude phase. During the takeoff is the primary cause, the primary phase that an accident may happen. The second most probably is in the approach and landing phase. Both of those are the high-risk areas of any flight.
We have heard witness accounts describing a boom. Now, whether that boom was the airplane actually going into the ground or whether it occurred before, does that become significant in the investigation?
Well, I think it's a factor in the investigation. How significant it is really open to question this time. What we have found out over many years that eyewitnesses, although they have good intentions, sometimes their statements are conflicting and not quite accurate in the final analysis.
Leo Janssens, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Andrea?
The plane involved in this latest air disaster was a Boeing 737, the best-selling commercial jet ever developed. But that popularity does not make it immune to problems or to tragedy. CNN's Judy Fortin looks at the Boeing 737's history.
The design of the Boeing 737 has changed 5 times since it was first introduced in 1964. The original 100 model was quickly superseded by the 737-200 edition, with a slightly larger seating capacity. It was first delivered to United Airlines in 1967. By the time it was upgraded 21 years later, over 1,000 planes had been delivered. During the 1980s, Boeing introduced the 737-300 and 400 series. They have longer wingspans than the 200 model and more passenger seats. By 1990, Boeing rolled out the 737-500. It replaced the earlier 200 edition. Despite its success in sales, the Boeing 737 has a safety record marred by 10 crashes or incidents during the past dozen years. Some of the biggest include the crash of a United Airlines Boeing 737 in 1991. It was making its final approach to the Colorado Springs, Colorado airport when it went into a spiral nosedive and crashed in a local park. 25 people on board the plane died. The cause of the crash still remains a mystery. In 1988, a flight attendant was killed when the top of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 tore away in midair over the Hawaiian Islands. A gaping hole blew open directly above first class, and the stewardess was sucked out. 61 of the 90 passengers on board were injured. And 78 died when an Air Florida jet crashed into a crowded bridge and sank in the Potomac River in January of 1982. The Tampa-bound plane had just taken off from Washington National Airport. 7 people and vehicles on the bridge died. Only 5 of the plane's passengers survived. I'm Judy Fortin reporting.
We do plan to continue our coverage of the crash of Flight 427, including any news conferences involving federal officials coming up throughout the day.
A look at our financial news is coming up. Also, the looming baseball strike. Is it too late to save the season? We'll talk with one expert and see what he has to say. Stay with us.